So I guess my dementia journey started very early, earlier than most. My mother's side of the family, her mother had Alzheimer's, younger onset, and so she passed. And then I knew of dementia or Alzheimer's, whatever. I knew it was kind of something funny with the brain. I didn't really know much as a kid, but my very first notable one was when my mother's older sister, she got it, and I was maybe 12, 13 years old. And I just remember my mother, like the devastation of just how she, just seeing her and how upset she was. So I was watching her mother pass, and then watching now her sister's diagnosed. And then slowly after that, another sibling gets diagnosed and another sibling gets diagnosed. And knowing that it's probably in our genes, knowing that there's so many of my mother's siblings with it, sometimes it's still hard having to actually accept it. And I think that's a lot of families are out there like that. Mm-hmm. They know something's wrong and they know what it is. But once you get that diagnosis, then it's written in stone, and you don't want that because you know what the future is going to be. I honestly didn't even know about anything about what Alzheimer's was, right, dementia, any of it. To me, they were just sick. And I knew that pieces of them were disappearing. I guess that's the easiest word to kind of explain to a child. But even then, they live in another state, so I didn't see them very often. So I really didn't get the gist of what was really happening. Whereas my mother's side of the family, they saw it. And so since we were so far away, we really didn't get it. And so it really didn't affect me like it affected them, nor how it affected my mother. Because I think her sadness came that she couldn't be there to help, that she was so far away from her siblings, So I think that's where her sadness and guilt came from. I was probably like 25, something like that. And I just had, I think, 2 children. It was one of those, my mother was working, she's always worked. And so it was one of those, she's just tired, she's exhausted, she's helping me, watching the kids, doing this. She's still, she has a husband, she has a career, all these things. It's just, she's tired, she doesn't have a moment to herself. She needs a break, probably a vacation, one of those. I never would have even connected dementia to it. It was obvious changes. Like, my mother was very meticulous. Her house was perfect and clean all the time. She was a seamstress, she was an artist, and she would quilt and crochet and just all those things that it's who she is, because she's done it for so long. You see some of those start to disappear, like the dishes are dirty, or, I remember one of the biggest things was when she didn't know how to put the bobbin in or thread her needle. And I was like, she's been doing this since she was like 20 years old. So for 30, she doesn't know how to do this. And so it's those things. And then her faith is so strong. And I remember going to her house and every morning, and she would be kneeling and praying with the Pope, and she wasn't. I was like, whoa, I think that was a slap in my face that something's wrong. Yeah. And so for me, a lot of it is grainy because it was one of those, okay, I don't remember barely anything from those first years, only because it was so overwhelming. Right. It was so exhausting. It was me and my dad trying to figure it out, like having to tell the family, having to tell, like, just those, I remember those moments of telling my uncle and him taking a deep breath in and just hearing the, and then that was it. That's what I remember. I remember those moments of when I tell people certain things or my children's reactions, but everything else is gray. Everything else didn't matter. Everything else was just a blur. People, friendship, relationships, all of that for the first few years is truly a blur. A lot of caregivers understand and they kind of get with. But for us, a really big part of it was the diagnosis. And we have to remember this was 10 years ago and things were very different. And so it was very weird how long it took. I would call a local hospital who specialized in this in the office, and I was like, I need to make an appointment for my mother. I think she has dementia. And they'll ask her name, and I'll tell her, she's 57. Oh, she's too young. I said, but how is she too young? She has Alzheimer's. We just need a diagnosis. We need, to figure this out. And they're like, no, she's too young. She has to be 65 and over. And so I was like, okay, maybe it was maybe I talked to the wrong person. So I'd give it a week, call again, same thing. I was very, very discouraged. I was really lucky though that she had amazing PCPs and just the care from them was great. So during the process of us trying to find her dementia diagnosis, we ended up finding out that she had epilepsy because she had 2 seizures within like a month. She's never had a seizure before. As far as I know, no one in her family has epilepsy. And so she took the test with where you put all the little gadgets on your head and things of that nature, and there it was. She has epilepsy too. And we got that diagnosis before we even got a dementia diagnosis. And that was just mind blowing because then, of course, in my mind, I'm like, if she's having silent seizures, if she's been having seizures all this year, is that what's going on? Is all these seizures created the dementia, and dementia's always been there and the seizures are just bringing it out now? To get the diagnosis was harder than it should be ever. And so for me, I want someone to tell me no to my face. So I decided I saw that there was like a local event happening, and there was a prominent person with that hospital who I kept calling, and they kept telling me no was going to be speaking. So I was like, oh, I'm going to go and ask him. I want to hear directly from his mouth that no, they cannot see my mother because of her age, even though I had the family history, even though all these things are here. So I asked him directly. I said, look, this is the situation. And my grandmother had it. My mother's siblings have been diagnosed. We believe my mother has it. It's just been so hard for me to get into this clinic, and it's for Alzheimer's, and they keep telling me no, she has to be 65. No, she has to be 65. And I said, why is that? He said, because of fraud. It was like a slap in the face. And I was like, I cannot believe this. I cannot believe this. And then I do remember thinking, a little tiny sliver of me, which I never really like to admit, is it because I am a minority? Right. Is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I have an accent? Is it because I look like this? Is it like, why is he denying me? And I was devastated. It was soul crushing to me. And so when my mother started seeing a physician, she finally, like an amazing physician here, she advocated for her. And then when she got her diagnosis with epilepsy, the doctor who diagnosed that, he also did like dementia studies as well, and he did so many things. And so it's because of them that I survived through this. It's because of their helps, their encouragement, the nurse practitioner. It's because of the people who see people every single day, who help them every single day, who are on the ground, is why I was able to make it through nothing. And so I think about that. At those moments when I'm just like talking to my caregivers, with what I do, and I'm like, man, I never want one of them to say that they had the same experience as I did. Never. Yeah. And I think that's why I do give so much to my job. Caregivers depend on you, and that's it. Families depend on you when you're a physician, when you're in a position of power, when you're in the medical field, or even us with Alzheimer's Arkansas. We have something that we stand for. And when caregivers call us, we have to know that they are in their most vulnerable place. And they're calling for a reason, because I never called anybody. When my mother was first diagnosed, I went to Alzheimer's Arkansas. I remember walking to Priscilla's office, and it was so dark, and she had stuff all over the place. And I was sat down at a table. There's books. I don't know what I said. I'm pretty sure I cried, because I cried all the time when they talked about it then. But she did give me a book, and it was just written by someone back then, and for kids, because I was worried about my children. I was like, how am I going to tell them? And I still have that book. I was supposed to return it, but I never did. So I still have it. And it's one of those things that she gave me the information about grants. She gave me the information about caregiver support groups. But where I was like, no one's going to understand. I wish I did pour myself into knowing things. But my own mental health was so broken. And then trying to balance everyone's expectation. My career stopping, my relationship with her dad. Just like everything I felt was just colliding all at once. And I had no identity. I was my kid's mother. I was this person, but where was Gigi? But at the same time, I didn't know how to comfort her. And that was one thing that I still think about. It's like, I wish I would have asked her more. I wish I would have asked her what she wanted. I wish I would have took her places and had like moments with her. But I was so just drowning within myself. Because of all of this, I distanced myself from my friends, because of my friends' careers, we were growing up together. And then I was like, once I was already overwhelmed with my children. And then, so the friendships was already strained. But then when she got diagnosed, I was like, all my friends just living their best life. And here I am talking about my 5 children, my relationship, and my mother who's slowly dying, who could die any day now, who could turn any day now, and my relationship, my kind of distant relationship with my dad, and all these other issues when they're doing great. Their lives are great right now. What do we have in common? And so I took myself out of those situations. I took myself out of those friendships. I knew that I wasn't going to be a good friend because no matter what they were going through, I was so miserable with what was happening in my life and watching her slowly disappear because I'm not only seeing her slowly disappear, I'm seeing my dad slowly disappear. So and that's something people don't realize. Like the spouses, it affects everyone. I think you have to get to your lowest point to really start fighting for yourself. And so for me, it was one of those, I was at my lowest point in my life to where I was just like XYZ's mother, XYZ's caregiver, XYZ's partner, and I didn't have an identity of my own. And I was getting older, and my kids were getting older. I'm like, what am I going to do when they leave? They're not always going to need me.
How old is your oldest?
My oldest is 17, and my youngest is 9.
Okay.
So it was one of those moments where I got to get back and figure out what I'm going to do. I have to find it. And for me, I have to be passionate about everything in my life. And I think that's come from seeing just like my mother and like how much she loved Jesus and how much she loved her family and crocheting and just she was so giving. And it was just, she was such a great person. And even though I know she had her demons, it was just like, just essentially, she was amazing. And so seeing that slowly get knocked down into a hollow shell, it gives you a different perspective. Honestly, it was with the Alzheimer's Association, and I don't know. I was like, I went to the office. I met Jane. She was over at that time. This was so many years ago, and I met her, and I was like, well, I just want to volunteer. I remember, I think I just like wrote names on letters, and that was it, and did something like that. And I met her, and she's like, oh, I want to take you out to an event. So she took me out to an event. I told my story, and that was it. It was just, I felt the way I felt because I felt my voice was finally heard. Because the instant of that physician telling me no, I felt he didn't hear me. So then that was my first moment, and then I became more vocal because the association, they really just kind of backed me up like, this is good. You should do it. You should keep going. You should keep going. So I was mission chair 2 years in a row. And when I was mission chair, I decided they allowed me to do it the way I wanted to do it. So I was like, okay, well, I want to have Hispanic brochures and African American. I want to make sure we have LGBTQ. I want to do all these things. They're like, yeah, that's great. That's great. So they get it. And I realized the more I talk about it, everyone has a connection. And they're willing to talk to you. And they're willing to listen to you. And it just gave me so much strength to keep doing that. And I felt like I was really having a voice. And that was the first time I've ever felt like that. And I loved how it felt, that people were listening to me.
Yeah.
And but also like, my mom would be so proud. Like, she would be so proud.
Yeah.
And so that part of it was attached to it as well. And then they were just encouraging. And then David came from the association. He's like, hey, you want to join AIM? You could really make a difference. Like, sure, what is this? Oh, I get to talk to Congress people, tell them my story. Same thing. I was like, yeah, that's a whole nother level. So once I joined that, it was, Gigi went crazy. I was like, I'm telling everybody.
Yeah.
So, and that just added fuel to the fire, and I just fell in love with it. And I knew that I had an impact, and that's it. Like, I wanted to have an impact like I felt my mother did. Yeah. I wanted to have an impact on people who they saw how kind she was and how nice she was and how giving. I wanted to do that because I would see it. She crocheted blankets and had them in the trunk of her car. And I remember we went to Walmart and she told me to go into the car, and she got a blanket out and took it to this homeless guy and like laid it on his lap. Like, oh, like that. I've never seen that before. Like, it was just, she would do things like that. We went to NICUs and she would crochet baby hats for the babies and we would drop them off. It was just the simple things that she did, the little things that people didn't know about that I saw. That was amazing to me. And I was like, I want to be like that. I'm going to have a voice for all of my family. I'm going to have a voice for my children. You know, and I always say, I never want my children to have to go to Congress. I never want them to have to talk, be a part of finding the cure. I never want them to have to do this. And that's why I'm doing it.
Right.
I'll cause a ruckus. I'll say what's on my mind. I'll say all the things that I hate about caregiving, and I'll be that person because I never want them to do that. And to me, that's my gift to my kids. I was worried when I went to that interview. I was like, I am not qualified for this. I've worked here and there in 10 years, but originally I went to culinary school. I was a pastry chef. That was it. I didn't know nothing else. And so I just saw it on Facebook, and I was like, okay, I'll send my resume, whatever. And then I got a call, and I had no idea. I didn't know what they were thinking. And when I went to the interview, I just pretty much laid it all out. I was like, I have nothing to lose. Absolutely nothing. I don't know how to do this position. I am not qualified for this. I am a mother, I'm a caregiver, and to me, that's what all I was, a mother and a caregiver, that's it. And so I didn't even think I would have never thought I'd be in the position I am today. I really wouldn't, but also I would never wanted to be doing this. Right. That's another thing, because one thing I always believe is you have to do what you're passionate about. I will never ever take a job. I will never ever be in a relationship. I would never ever be something or somewhere where I'm not passionate about it. And that's it. I think what caregivers don't realize is that we're also mourning. We're really going through mourning every step of your love. Yeah, every step of the moment that she doesn't know how to walk. She doesn't know how to, you see her trying to figure out what the word is, but she can't figure out the word. You mourn those moments. You mourn the moments that you don't have with them. Or watching your child see their abuela get sick, and you mourn that, oh my gosh, how is this child going to what are they going to be like watching their best friend slowly disappear and go through all these changes and not understand at such a young age? How is this going to affect their mental health? How is this going to affect their ability to be around diseases? How is this going to affect them? And so for me as a mother, and my children still being very active around my mother, that's one thing that I thought about. I was like, is this really a good thing? Is this really a good thing for my children to be emerged? And my girls, they say they're caregivers too. They took care of their abuela. They're caregivers as well. And to me, it could go either way. They could become beautiful, like compassionate people, or they could just become voids, like not have any attachment or empathy at all, because what they saw was so painful, they had to hide it. And so that's when being a parent, and you have somebody who you're carrying, you're a caregiver as well, and you have young children, it's constantly a fight, and you're fighting to figure out what's best for everybody. And so you give up yourself to appease everyone as well. And so that was my biggest thing. Like, am I doing okay? Should I really have my kids around it? And so now 10 years later, 11 years later, it did affect some of my kids. Yeah. They're still really empathetic, but one of them kind of closed down a little more emotionally. One of them is like probably is an amazing caregiver. She could take care of everybody and not even blink. And so I did see how it affects everyone differently. But at the end of the day, they are so compassionate. They have so much empathy. They are so loving that I'm okay. It makes me okay, because they were my biggest concern. Like, I'll make it through this. But the effect that it had long term on my children, it was something that was always in the back of my mind. And so you have to think about what caregivers think about their children, their friends, their spouse, their loved one, their partners, all these other things. And you're not just thinking about right now, because you're thinking about what's my life going to be 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, when my loved one dies. Where am I going to be? I'm single. I'm a single mother, like it ruined, things like this. You think it doesn't ruin relationships, it makes it stronger. That's not how it always is. Yeah, because you change. I will be first to admit, I changed. I completely changed. I got a little harder. I got a little bitter. I was angry. So I wasn't the best partner for a moment. I wasn't the best mother either. I wasn't the best caregiver or daughter or sister or a friend. And I knew that. And so that's why I stepped out away from a lot of things. To me, expectations are always there. No one said, oh, Gigi, you're going to take care of your parents when you're older because you're a woman. No one says that. But culturally, it is part of who we are. Right. It is part of, I cook, you clean, everyone has their roles. And so I think that is a lot for many cultures, whether we want to or not, family comes first. And so that's also something that's kind of a big cloud above our heads too. Right. Like, okay, if my mom gets sick, then it's going to be me. and I'll probably be alone. My siblings may or may not help. Right. And you may in the beginning, like I meet a lot of caregivers, everyone's gung-ho in the beginning, maybe for a month, and then everything starts dwindling off. And so the expectations that you're going to have support may be there, but realistically, as the disease gets longer and longer, it's going to dwindle off. And then once you see that, that's a whole nother level of depression and anxiety, and this, you go into yourself even more as a caregiver. And so I don't think people realize the whole span of it all, the whole range of being a caregiver. Caregiving. Yes, it's great to have a support system, have a tribe, have all those things, but realistically, with a disease like dementia, which could last, we're on year 11 with my mother, this long, people dwindle away. Let's be realistic here. Family dwindles away. People don't want to stop their life to keep going, or they're not able to mentally. And I think the mental aspect of it is probably more damaging than the physical aspect of it, of seeing your loved one disappear from dementia, because that's the reality. And so, yeah, I think our expectations of others, that's the hardest thing. We have to be really realistic, especially if we're the main caregiver, that we need to be able to do it by ourselves. Yeah. We need to be able to do it whenever, the caregiver usually dies. So if my father died and I had my mother, I needed to be able to do it by myself, or with just asking my brother for just a little bit of help, whatever they could give me. And I think families, we have to realize that. We have to accept it. And because I think as caregivers, we want to be the best. We want to give our all to our parents, or our loved one, our husband, whoever it is, but we're dying, we're killing ourselves doing it, and we're losing ourselves within them. And that's one thing that I think is the hardest thing not to do, because especially if you're a family caregiver and you don't have a job, you don't have friends, you don't have things, your life is this person. And sooner or later, you're going to go to bed and be like, what am I going to do when they die? And that was it. What am I going to do? I don't have friends. I don't have a career. I can't start again, all over again. I don't have money. I don't have anything. So it's those fears that sneak up on you, that you've given your life just effortlessly and fearlessly and trusting, but you forgot the fact that they're not always going to be here, but you probably will.